Hey, Jeff Gibbons here with another machine tutorial, and this one is going to be on music theory. It's going to be all about notes. So what are the notes on the piano? How do we find those notes on machine? How can we manipulate machine to make our lives a lot easier with things like scales and chords? And then how can we take a sample and fit it into the key of our song? And what is the key anyways? So let's start with the notes on the piano. The way the piano is laid out, it really favors the key of C. And so when I say the key, I am talking about a set of notes that your song is adhering to. And that means it has a certain amount of white notes and a certain amount of black notes. But in order to understand what a key is, first we need to understand what the notes are, and then we need to understand what a scale is. So we've got C, D, E, F. There's actually no black key in between E and F, G, and then we get up to A, there's no H, and then we're up to B, and then C. So this is called an octave when you're going from one note to the next iteration of that note. So we've got all the white notes just get a letter name. So one thing to understand before we talk about the black notes is something called an interval. And an interval is the distance between two notes. So I could say this interval right here to this one right here is a half step. And the distance from this note to the next one is a whole step. So anytime you go from one adjacent note to the next, you are talking a half step. Anytime you skip it, we call it a whole step. And then once we get into farther intervals, like this one right here, we call that a third. And that's where names like the 7, this distance right here is a 7th. So don't worry too much more about intervals, but do understand this half step and whole step. So if I want a whole step up from this note, I just got to skip one, and I'm onto that note right there. So that's an interval. So right here, we could call this note an F sharp because it is coming up from an F, or we could call it a G flat because it's going down from a G. So now let's go look at how this works on machine. And so I've got C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, and so on and so forth. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and C. So there's our chromatic scale. The question for beginning musicians is, how do I know whether to call it C sharp or D flat? It comes down to something called key. So the key that you are in a song is going to define the black notes. We have to figure out what key you're in, and then we can figure out whether to call these things sharps or whether to call them flats. The way we can figure out the key is to work back with our scales. So I'm just going to go back to my piano over here for a second. When we play any major scale, the first note is followed by a whole step. And remember, a whole step is where we skip a note. So we've got a whole step right here because we're skipping this black note. And then a whole step here because we're skipping this one. And then a half, we're not skipping a note. And then a whole, 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 and half. And that's how you make a major scale. And you look at the piano, it's kind of confusing. We go over to, say, let's start on an A. My intervals go again as follows. I got to do whole step, so I need to skip this white note. There's no C in the key of A. So A, B, C sharp. So we'd actually call that C sharp. We wouldn't call it D flat because we still have to represent all of the letters, all of the letter names in every scale. That's just kind of the way it works. So in this case, we know if we start on A and then a B, and then we skip this C because we got to do that whole step interval, we would call that a C sharp. We wouldn't call it D flat because the next note is the D because it's a half step. Then we have another whole step. Another whole step, we got to skip that F and go up to F sharp. Again, we know we call that F sharp, not G flat. And then we skip the G because we need another whole step. Call that G sharp, and then we're back to A. So you can see with every scale, you have to represent every letter of the musical alphabet, which is A to G. And that's what determines whether we call it a C sharp or a D flat or whatever. How does this work on machine? Let's go look at machine for a second. I'm going to go back to my Rhodes. The default setting is just for your scale to be on the main chromatic scale. So there's our chromatic scale, which is the same thing as going like this on the piano. Just playing all of the notes. But why bother keeping it on chromatic? Because on Maschine, what we can do is we can set a scale. So what I can do is go over to the scale right here. I can go to main scale, and I'm going to keep it on the main scale. And I'm going to choose major. So now, if I wanted to do F sharp, I go over here, and I go to keyboard, and F sharp is my root note right here, and it's on major, so watch what happens. So now I'm playing in the key of F sharp. And then you can also play chords here. So again, to reiterate, if you know the key of the song you're in, choose your major scale or your minor scale. We'll talk about that in a second. Choose your major scale, and then choose your root note right here. And all you have to do is hit semitone up or down to get the root note at the right spot. So if you're in key of C, go up, and now you're just playing in the key of C. It's perfect. Let's go back to F sharp for a second. And so then the next thing that you can do with Maschine is chords. And a chord is just an arrangement of 3 or more notes on any instrument. There's a C major chord. Here is an F major chord and a G major chord. What we can do on Maschine is we can go back to our setup, and instead of hitting keyboard mode, we can hit chords. We've got major or minor or a bunch of other things that we won't worry about. And then we've got whether we want to use a chord set, a set of chords that have been prearranged by native instruments. The harmonizer one is interesting because it'll start out and we can choose 1, 3, 5. And what that means is 1, 3, 5. There's our chord, and we can kind of think of it this way. Think back to those intervals. Remember I said this was a third. Well, this is a fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 1, 3, and 5. If you were to add a 7, it would sound like this, or like this, depending on the type of 7. So those are the kinds of chords that we can add. So watch what happens now. It just plays a chord when I hit one note. And it's going through all of the chords that are in the key of F sharp major. So what's happening here? Well, you're getting the first, the third, and the fifth, and you can see them even light up. And if I press record on Maschine, you'll see those notes. So you can see those notes played in as if I played them on the keyboard 3 at a time. So I could go in and change all of these notes, or maybe get rid of a few notes on some of them or something like that. If you want the more jazzy chords, you would have to go to the 1, 3, 5, 7. All right, so that's enough about notes. That's how notes are displayed on Maschine. So what I've got here is a little thing I was just playing around for this video, and I want to start with a saxophone lick. And if you look here, we can see that this sax is in B. Let's see if that works. Let's play that, and then let's just listen to our other piano track and see if this is in the same key. And if I press play, and I can hear that this saxophone is in B. And in this case, it's in something called B minor. And we haven't talked about major or minor just yet, but those are two really important modes to understand. And the best way to think about major versus minor is one sounds happy and one sounds sad versus major, right? So if you are in a minor key, then things are going to be a little bit different. If you have a sample and it sounds kind of chill, kind of mellow, kind of sad, it's probably a minor sample. It seems like a lot of music that's kind of chill, hip-hop stuff is going to be fairly minor. If this sample is minor, it's in B minor, we can go over to a Rhodes instrument. So let's look at our Rhodes here. And right now, I've got it set on chords, but I've got it set to the wrong key. I was in F sharp. So let's take this one and we'll put it in B. So there's B as our root note, but it's not major, it is minor. So let's set that to minor, and then let's just set it to 1, 3, 5 for a second. And then let's play along with that sax and see if this works. If we want to get a little more jazzy, we can go to 1, 3, 5, 7. And so that means it adds 1, 3, 5, 7 on each chord. And then on this chord, 1, 3, 5, 7. And then on this chord, 1, 3, 5, 7. So we're getting these block chords, which aren't, necessarily what a jazz musician would do, but it's getting us in the ballpark without having any piano skills. And the thing you could do, if you played in some simple chords, is just play the root note on a bass line. So let's go over to a bass instrument, which is the C1 one right here. And right now, it's already in the key of B. If it wasn't, then of course you just set your semitones till the bottom root note here is the proper one for the key of your song. And then you choose your main scale and then choose major or minor. And in this case, of course, I want it to be minor. So I hope that gives you a little bit more information about notes, about chords, how it works in Maschine. And make sure you go watch the rest of my videos, hit the subscribe button and the bell, and thanks for watching.